The alley air was a cold, wet towel slapped against her face. It smelled of sour milk from the diner's overflowing dumpster and the damp rot of cardboard softening in the evening mist. A single neon sign, a sputtering pink flamingo with a broken leg, cast a sickly, pulsating glow on the grimy brick walls. 7-year-old Lily pulled her jacket tighter, the thin fabric doing little to fend off the November chill that seeped into her bones. Her world had shrunk to this narrow, suffocating space, a canyon of shadow and fear. She clutched Barnaby, a teddy bear whose fur was worn smooth from years of anxious squeezing, his button eyes the only friendly witnesses to her silent terror. This is how a child becomes invisible. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, until their silence is mistaken for peace and their stillness for obedience. A pair of headlights sliced through the darkness at the end of the alley, sweeping across the graffiti-scarred walls. Lily flinched, pressing herself deeper into the alcove behind the dumpster, making herself smaller, tighter, less real. It was the car, the long, silent silver sedan that moved through the world with an unnerving grace. Mr. Abernathy's car. He had said he would be coming to her house tonight, after her father left for his shift at the warehouse. He had used his special voice, the one that was smooth like honey but felt like swallowing glass. "Just to check on you, Lilybug," he'd said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. She had waited until she heard her father's truck rattle down the street, then slipped out the back door. Barnaby clutched to her chest and ran. She had run until her lungs burned and her legs ached, until this alley offered a sliver of refuge. The sedan idled for a moment, its engine a low, predatory hum. Lily held her breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She could feel the vibration through the soles of her worn sneakers. The light was a physical weight, pressing down on her, searching for her. "Please go away," she chanted in her mind, a desperate, silent prayer to a God she wasn't sure listened to little girls hiding behind garbage cans. The car finally moved on, its red tail lights shrinking into the night. A wave of relief, cold and shaky, washed over her. But it was temporary. He was circling, hunting. He wouldn't give up easily, he never did. It was then that a new sound began to build, a different kind of rumble. It wasn't the singular, sleek purr of the sedan, but a deeper, more complex chorus of noise. It was the synchronized thunder of heavy machinery, a sound that seemed to rise from the pavement itself. 4 motorcycles, big and dark, rolled into the mouth of the alley. They moved slowly, with a disciplined precision that was at odds with their formidable appearance. The noise was immense, yet it wasn't chaotic. It was steady, rhythmic, a low thrum that vibrated in her chest cavity. Lily's fear, which had momentarily receded, came rushing back, sharp and overwhelming. She had traded one monster for 4. These men were huge, clad in black leather that seemed to drink the already faint light. Their faces were obscured by the shadows cast by the buildings, making them anonymous, terrifying figures of the night. She squeezed Barnaby so hard she expected him to squeak, but he remained silent, a loyal, fuzzy soldier in her losing war. The lead rider cut his engine, and the sudden partial silence was more jarring than the noise. One by one, the other engines followed, until the only sounds were the ticking of cooling metal and the distant sigh of city traffic. They hadn't seen her. Not yet. But the alley was a dead end. There was nowhere left to run. A year ago, Lily's world had been bright. It had been her mother's laughter, the smell of baking bread, and the soft warmth of being tucked into bed. Then came the sickness. A quiet thief that stole her mother's energy, then her voice, then her breath. Her father, a good man with hands calloused from hard work, was shattered. Grief hollowed him out, leaving behind a ghost who moved through their small house with a permanent weariness. He took a second job, a night shift, to pay the piling bills. His absence became a constant presence, a silence that echoed the one her mother had left. He loved Lily. She knew he did, but he was drowning, and he didn't have the strength to pull her to shore with him. This is how a system fails. A social worker came once, a tired woman with a clipboard and a strained smile. She asked questions Lily knew the answers to. "Is your daddy good to you?" "Yes." "Do you have enough to eat?" "Yes." The house was tidy enough. The refrigerator held milk and eggs. The bruises weren't on her skin, they were on her soul, and there was no box to check for that. Mr. Abernathy had entered their lives during this bleak period, a beacon of community spirit. He was a town councilman, a generous donor to the school library, a man whose picture was in the local paper for funding the new playground. He had approached her father after a parent-teacher conference, offering to help. "It takes a village, my friend," he had said, clapping her father on the shoulder. "Let me help Lily with her reading." "It would be my pleasure." Her father, exhausted and grateful, had agreed instantly. The mentorship began in the sunlit corner of the public library, but it slowly moved to quieter, more private spaces, to Mr. Abernathy's large, silent house. He taught her that secrets were a special kind of gift between two people. Their secrets. He told her she was smarter than the other kids, more perceptive. He made her feel chosen. Then the secrets began to feel heavy. They were dark, confusing things she had to hold inside. He told her that if she ever shared their secrets, terrible things would happen. Her father would lose his job. They would be forced to leave their home. She would be sent away to a place with cold rooms and no windows. He built a cage of fear around her, bar by invisible bar, until she was trapped. Her drawings at school, once filled with vibrant flowers and smiling suns, became dark scribbles of tangled lines and shadowy figures. Her teacher, Miss Albright, had noted her withdrawal, attributing it to her mother's passing. Lily became an expert at being unseen, a ghost in her own life, haunting the hallways of her school. Her one anchor was Barnaby. The bear had been her mother's last gift, given to her in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. "He'll keep you safe," her mother had whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Barnaby absorbed her tears, listened to her whispered fears, and kept her secrets locked in his cotton stuffing. There was one afternoon she would never forget. She had brought Barnaby to Mr. Abernathy's house. He had seen it and smiled his thin smile. "Let me hold him for you," he'd offered. When she hesitated, his eyes went cold. He plucked the bear from her arms. For a full minute, he held it just out of her reach, watching the panic bloom on her face. It was a silent, brutal lesson in his power over her, over the one thing she loved. Then, just as tears began to well in her eyes, he handed it back. "See? Safe with me," he'd said. Tonight, that memory had been the catalyst. When he'd called and told her he was coming over, he had mentioned bringing a special gift for Barnaby. The thought of his hands on the bear, her last piece of her mother, was what finally made her run. The four men in the alley moved with a quiet purpose that belied their intimidating frames. They were the Sentinels, a motorcycle club that the town's more respectable citizens viewed with suspicion. They saw the leather vests, the patches, the rumbling engines, and saw trouble. They didn't see the code. They didn't see the self-imposed mission that drove these men to patrol the forgotten edges of their town every single night. The lead rider, the one who had dismounted first, was known as Roadblock. He was the club's president, a man whose calm demeanor was as solid and unyielding as his name suggested. He walked with the steady gait of a man who had seen true chaos and had no time for the petty theatrics of aggression. A faded patch on his vest, barely visible in the gloom, hinted at a past in a desert far from here. A past that had taught him the devastating cost of looking away from something wrong. He had made a vow in that sand-swept land, a promise to a fallen brother that he would never again stand by and do nothing. The largest of the four, a man whose shoulders seemed as wide as a doorway, was Wrench. He was the club's mechanic, his hands capable of stripping down a complex engine and reassembling it with surgical precision. Those same hands, often stained with grease and oil, were known for their gentleness. He was the one who stopped to help stranded motorists, the one who once spent an entire afternoon fixing a little girl's bicycle chain, his massive frame hunched over the tiny pink bike. His payment had been a plate of slightly burnt chocolate chip cookies, which he had declared the best he'd ever eaten. His strength was a shield he used for others, not a weapon. A third man, leaner and with watchful, intelligent eyes, was Doc. He had been a paramedic until the city's relentless trauma had burned him out. He had seen too many endings, too many tragedies that could have been prevented if someone had just intervened a little sooner. He had traded his ambulance for a motorcycle, but he never lost the instinct to scan every scene for signs of injury, both visible and hidden. He was the club's medic, its conscience, the calm voice of reason in a storm. The fourth man had already moved to the mouth of the alley, a silent silhouette against the distant streetlights. His name was Ghost. He rarely spoke, but he saw everything. He had walked away from a violent past, a life he never discussed, and had found a new purpose in being a protective shadow. He understood that the greatest threats often moved in silence, and his role was to be quieter, more patient, than any danger that dared to enter their territory. Their nightly ride was a ritual. They didn't seek trouble, they sought to prevent it. They checked the area around the women's shelter, made a slow pass by the park where homeless teens sometimes gathered, and ensured the night shift workers at the 24-hour laundromat felt safe. They were the unofficial, unseen guardians of the vulnerable, bound by a loyalty forged not in blood, but in a shared understanding of a broken world and their duty to mend the small pieces they could reach. They were not vigilantes, they were witnesses. And tonight, in this dark, foul-smelling alley, they were about to bear witness to something that would test their code to its core. Roadblock's eyes, accustomed to scanning dark roads for hazards, caught the flicker of movement behind the dumpster. It was small, a brief flutter of cloth. He didn't react immediately. He simply raised a hand, a subtle gesture that brought his men to a state of quiet readiness. He swung his leg over his bike, his boots making a soft crunch on the loose gravel. He didn't stride forward like an authority figure. He moved with a deliberate lack of threat, keeping his hands visible and his posture open. He stopped a good 20 feet from the dumpster, a distance that felt safe, respectful. Then he did something unexpected. He crouched down, bringing his large frame closer to the ground, making himself smaller. He didn't speak, he just waited, his presence a calm, solid question mark in the pulsating neon light. Lily watched him from her hiding spot, her breath caught in her throat. He was a giant of a man, covered in leather and patches that looked like cryptic symbols. He should have been terrifying. But he wasn't yelling. He wasn't advancing. He was just waiting. It was a kind of patience she had never experienced from an adult. It wasn't the impatient waiting of a teacher or the annoyed waiting of her father. It was a deep, steady stillness. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath with her. That moment was shattered by the return of the headlights. The silver sedan was back. It nosed into the alley, its bright beams pinning them all in a harsh, interrogative glare. The car, the man, the source of her terror was here. The bikers were between her and him, an unplanned, imposing barricade. The car door opened, and Mr. Abernathy stepped out. He was dressed in an expensive coat, his face arranged in an expression of paternal concern. It was a performance he had perfected. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and confident. He gestured vaguely toward the dumpster. "Just looking for my little neighbor. Lily? She has a habit of wandering off. Likes to play these silly games of hide and seek." He took a step forward, his smile widening. "Come on out, Lilybug. Game's over." Lily shrank back, the familiar tendrils of his control wrapping around her. But then she looked past him, at the back of the man who was still crouched low. He hadn't moved, he hadn't turned around. He was a rock, a wall, and an idea, small and fragile, sparked in the darkness of her mind. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. Roadblock slowly turned his head, just enough so she could see his profile. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw no judgment, no anger, only a quiet inquiry. He gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't a command, it was an offering, a choice. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" That small gesture unlocked something inside her. It was the first time in a year that an adult had asked her a question without already knowing the answer they wanted to hear. She took a ragged breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. Her voice, when it came out, was barely a whisper, but in the charged silence of the alley it was as loud as a scream. "He's not my neighbor." She paused, her mind racing, searching for a piece of truth that was hers alone, a secret he couldn't twist. She remembered the secret place, the one he boasted about. "And he has the wrong color car." The words hung in the air, nonsensical to anyone else, but they were a key, and she had just handed it to the man in the leather jacket. Mr. Abernathy's practiced smile tightened at the edges. Across the alley, the four bikers exchanged glances. The air grew heavy, the temperature seeming to drop several degrees. The game had just changed. Mr. Abernathy chuckled, a sound that was sharp and brittle, completely devoid of warmth. "Oh, kids," he said, shaking his head with theatrical exasperation. "Such vivid imaginations. Her poor father is worried sick. He asked me to pick her up from the sitters and she just bolted. Come on now, Lilybug. Let's not bother these gentlemen any longer." He took another step forward, his hand outstretched, his demeanor shifting from concerned citizen to a man whose patience was wearing thin. As if on an invisible signal, Wrench moved. He didn't rush. He simply straightened up from his lean against his motorcycle and took 2 casual steps to stand beside Roadblock. The two of them together were an impassable wall of worn leather and quiet resolve. Mr. Abernathy stopped, his outstretched hand faltering. The alley suddenly felt much smaller, the exit much farther away. Roadblock's voice was the next thing to move. It was low and unhurried, like gravel settling deep in the earth. He didn't look at Lily. His gaze was fixed entirely on Mr. Abernathy. "The girl said you have the wrong color car." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, a repetition of the strange words that had been spoken. Abernathy's facade of pleasantry began to flake away, revealing the cold irritation beneath. "What? That's utterly ridiculous. This is my car. It's a silver sedan. Are you blind?" "That's not what she said," Roadblock replied, his tone unchanging. The stillness of the bikers was more intimidating than any overt threat could ever be. They were not angry, they were simply present, and their presence was absolute. "She didn't say you have the wrong car, she said you have the wrong color car." He paused, letting the distinction settle in the frigid air. "What color is the car you're supposed to have, Mr. Abernathy?" This was the question that broke the spell. It was a masterfully simple trap. Lily had told Mr. Abernathy a secret once, one he had shared with her to make her feel special. He owned a second car, a classic, gleaming midnight blue convertible. He kept it in a private garage on the outskirts of town, a place no one knew about. It was where he took her for their special talks. It was their secret world. By mentioning the color, Lily wasn't just being a confused child. She was signaling an intimate, hidden knowledge. She was proving a connection that a mere neighbor, a helpful family friend, would never have. Abernathy froze. His mind, usually so quick and agile in its deceptions, stumbled. To admit to the blue car would be to admit to the secret place, to the secret relationship. To deny it would be a lie, but how could they possibly know? He had underestimated the child. He had underestimated the strange, calm logic of the men in front of him. His friendly mask dissolved completely, replaced by a tight, venomous glare. "This is harassment," he hissed, his voice losing its polished charm. "I'm a respected member of this community. I'm calling the police. You thugs are threatening me." "Good," a new voice said. It was Doc, stepping forward slightly. He held up his own phone, its screen already lit. Let's get them down here. We can tell them our side. You can tell them yours. We'll sort it all out." The offer was calm, reasonable, and utterly devastating to Abernathy's position. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The hunter was now the prey, cornered in a dark alley. At the entrance, Ghost remained a steadfast shadow, his presence ensuring that no one was leaving until this was finished. The trap, sprung by a little girl's brave and cryptic words, was now firmly shut. The wail of a siren grew from a distant cry to a piercing shriek, culminating in flashing red and blue lights that painted the alley in chaotic, strobing colors. 2 police officers stepped out of their patrol car, followed by a man in a rumpled trench coat. Detective Miller. He had a face etched with the weariness of 1,000 late nights and 1,000 sad stories. His eyes took in the scene with a practiced cynicism. A well-dressed, prominent citizen looking flustered, a group of imposing bikers looking like textbook troublemakers, and a small, terrified child hiding in the shadows. His professional bias clicked into place before a single word was spoken. Abernathy seized the advantage. He approached Miller with an air of aggrieved relief. "Thank God you're here, Detective. This little girl, Lily, she's the daughter of a friend. She ran off, and I was just trying to get her home safely. These individuals cornered me. They wouldn't let me leave. They've been intimidating us." He gestured toward the sentinels, casting them as the villains of the piece. Miller's gaze fell upon Roadblock and his men. He saw the patches, the leather, the sheer physical presence, and his expression hardened. "All right, what's going on here?" he asked, his tone clipped and impatient. Roadblock didn't rise to the bait. He remained calm. "We were here. The girl was hiding. This man showed up. She seemed afraid of him." Miller sighed. It sounded like a messy domestic misunderstanding. Exactly the kind of call he hated. He knelt down to speak to Lily, but his approach was all wrong. He was too official, his voice too loud in the enclosed space. "Hey there, kiddo. This man a friend of your dad's?" Lily, overwhelmed by the flashing lights and the new authority figure, retreated back into her shell of silence, hugging Barnaby and refusing to make eye contact. To Miller, it looked like a child shutting down, possibly out of fear of the bikers. He was ready to write his report and send everyone on their way. Ask him about the blue car. Roadblock's voice was quiet, meant for Miller alone. He had moved to the detective's side, speaking in a low, respectful tone. He wasn't demanding anything. He was offering a thread. Miller shot him an annoyed look. "What blue car?" That's what the girl said. She said he had the wrong color car. Just ask him about a blue one. Roadblock repeated, his gaze steady. Exasperated, but trained to follow even the most absurd leads, Miller turned back to Abernathy. Sir, for my report, was there some confusion about a vehicle? The girl mentioned a blue car. It was a small thing, a tiny crack in Abernathy's story, but his reaction was telling. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he could suppress it. His denial was too fast, too vehement. A blue car? Absolutely not. I've never owned a blue car in my life. This silver sedan is my only vehicle. It was a flat, unequivocal statement. A provable lie. A quick check of DMV records would either confirm or deny it instantly. This was the first detail that didn't fit, the first red flag that made Detective Miller pause and reassess his initial judgment. He changed his tack with Lily. He asked the uniformed officers to turn off the flashing lights, bringing a semblance of calm back to the alley. He spoke to her more softly this time, asking about her teddy bear, Barnaby. Slowly, tentatively, she responded. Bolstered by the silent, steadfast presence of the 4 bikers who had not moved an inch, she found another sliver of courage. She whispered a new secret, a detail so specific and so innocent it carried the undeniable weight of truth. He keeps my drawing of a unicorn. In his other car? In a special glove box. I made it for my mommy's birthday. It has a rainbow horn. This was it. This was the piece of evidence that transformed the situation. It was not a vague accusation. It was a concrete physical object in a specific hidden location. A drawing of a unicorn with a rainbow horn. Detective Miller's entire demeanor shifted. The tired, cynical cop vanished, replaced by a focused, sharp-eyed investigator. He looked from the small girl to the respected councilman, and for the first time, he saw not a misunderstanding, but a crime scene. He got on his radio, his voice now crisp and authoritative, requesting a warrant to search Abernathy's properties, including a private garage registered in his name on the industrial edge of town. The sentinels didn't move. They watched as Lily was gently guided into the care of a female officer, destined for a child advocacy center where she could speak to a trained forensic interviewer. They stayed until the patrol car pulled away, its lights now off, carrying the small, brave witness to safety. Only then did they mount their bikes, their purpose in the alley fulfilled. They had stood their ground, and the slow, heavy gears of justice had begun to turn. The gears of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The warrant was executed before dawn. In the pristine, private garage, tucked away under a dust cover, sat a flawless midnight blue convertible, and inside its glove compartment, nestled among maps and ownership documents, was a small stack of children's drawings. On top of the pile was a slightly crumpled piece of paper depicting a unicorn with a vibrant, rainbow-colored horn. Beneath it were others, a dozen more, collected over years. Each was a small, colorful trophy, a secret token from a secret friendship. The discovery sent a shockwave through the police department. This wasn't a one-time incident, it was a pattern, a horrifying, calculated methodology of a predator hiding in plain sight. The news of Councilman Abernathy's arrest broke the next morning, and the town reeled in collective disbelief. He was a benefactor, a family man, a leader. The narrative that immediately took hold, fueled by Abernathy's expensive lawyer, was one of a tragic misunderstanding. The official story was that a troubled, grieving child had been manipulated by a notorious motorcycle gang with a grudge. The local newspaper, eager for a sensational story, ran with it. The headline read, "Community Leader Harassed by Bikers in Bizarre Nighttime Confrontation." The sentinels were painted as villains, their quiet intervention twisted into an act of intimidation. Supporters rallied around Abernathy. Friends and colleagues wrote letters to the editor defending his character. People whispered in the grocery store aisles, "That poor man," and "You know how those biker types are." But in a quiet classroom at Northwood Elementary, Lily's teacher, Ms. Albright, read the article and felt a cold dread wash over her. The story didn't feel right. She thought of Lily, of the bright, happy girl who had slowly faded over the past year. She remembered the increasingly dark and chaotic nature of her drawings, the way she had stopped raising her hand in class, the way she flinched from casual touch. Ms. Albright had seen the signs of distress but had filed them away under the neat, simple label of grief. Guilt, sharp and sickening, rose in her throat. She went to her filing cabinet and pulled out Lily's folder. The progression was undeniable. Smiling suns gave way to dark, tangled masses. Colorful rainbows were replaced by jagged black lines that looked like cages. She put the drawings in her briefcase and drove straight to the police station, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. Meanwhile, the Sentinels responded to the public smearing with their characteristic stoicism. They gave no interviews. They issued no statements. They simply acted. When a group of Abernathy supporters gathered outside the small house where Lily and her father lived, shouting accusations and holding signs, the Sentinels appeared. They parked their 4 motorcycles in a neat line across the street. They didn't rev their engines. They didn't say a word. They just sat on their bikes, their arms crossed, watching. A silent, unmovable line of protection. Their presence was a powerful counter-narrative. It was a quiet, constant declaration. We are here. We are not leaving. This child and this family are under our watch. The would-be harassers, unnerved by the silent, unwavering scrutiny, soon dispersed. Day after day, the bikers maintained their silent vigil. The community began to notice. The narrative began to shift. Other parents, seeing the bikers' steadfast loyalty, began to reconsider. Small, unsettling memories of Abernathy, an overly familiar touch, a strange comment, an insistence on being alone with the child, started to surface. The whispers in the grocery store aisles began to change from "that poor man" to "did you ever notice?" The public reckoning had begun. The trial was a crucible for the town, forcing it to confront the monster it had harbored in its midst. Abernathy's defense team was slick and well-funded. They portrayed him as a benevolent mentor, a victim of a disturbed child's fantasy, egged on by a menacing gang. They tried to put the Sentinels on trial, questioning their motives, their methods, their very right to have been in that alley. But the prosecution, led by a sharp, empathetic district attorney, had something more powerful than speculation. They had the truth. They had the mountain of evidence from the garage, the drawings, each a silent testament from a different child. They had the testimony of Ms. Albright, who walked the jury through the heartbreaking timeline of Lily's artwork, showing them the visual diary of a child's spirit being crushed. And, one by one, other parents came forward, their children now empowered to speak, their stories weaving a terrifying tapestry of manipulation and abuse. The pivotal moment of the trial came with Lily's testimony. To spare her the trauma of facing Abernathy directly, she was allowed to testify from a separate room via closed-circuit television. In the courtroom, the gallery was packed. In the last row sat 4 men in worn leather vests. Roadblock, Wrench, Doc, and Ghost were there, not as witnesses but as anchors. Lily's father had told her they would be there, and knowing this gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. On the television screen, her face was small and serious. She wasn't crying. Her voice was quiet but steady. She spoke with a simple, devastating clarity. She told the jury about the blue car, She described the secret glove box where he kept his treasures. She explained the rules of their secrets and the terrible things he promised would happen if she ever broke them. When the prosecutor asked her about the unicorn drawing, Lily's voice filled with a righteous innocence that no actor could replicate. "I made it for my mommy," she said, "for her birthday in heaven. It was supposed to be a secret for her, but he took it. He said it was our special secret now. He said all the drawings in the box were special secrets." In that moment, every person in the jury box understood. They saw not a confused child, but a brave little girl fighting to reclaim her own story. The verdict, when it came, was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The judge, his voice thick with emotion, sentenced Abernathy to the maximum term allowed by law, looking directly at the camera feed to Lily's room and telling her that her courage had made the whole town safer. As Lily and her father left the courthouse, they were met with a chaotic scrum of reporters and cameras. But before the media could descend on them, a path was cleared. The sentinels had formed a silent, protective corridor, their broad shoulders shielding the small family from the intrusive lenses and shouting questions. They walked them to their car, a silent honor guard. As Lily was about to get in, Wrench, the giant mechanic, knelt down so he was at her eye level. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small chrome wrench, polished to a mirror shine. It was no bigger than her finger. "For being the strongest person we know," he rumbled, his deep voice soft with respect. Lily took it, her small hand closing around the cool, solid metal. It felt heavy, like a medal, a promise. The conviction of a prominent figure like Abernathy sent tremors through the foundations of the community, forcing a painful and necessary self-examination. The comfortable illusion of safety was shattered, replaced by the stark reality that evil could wear a friendly face and a charitable reputation. The aftermath was not about revenge, but about reform. The youth center, which had proudly borne Abernathy's name on a large brass plaque, was the first to change. After a series of heated town hall meetings, the building was renamed the Lily's Light Community Center. The brass plaque was melted down. More importantly, the center's board, in consultation with child protection experts, drafted a new set of volunteer screening protocols. They went far beyond simple background checks, requiring extensive interviews, multiple references, and a mandatory two-adult rule, ensuring no child was ever left alone with a single volunteer. This new policy, dubbed the Abernathy Clause by a neighboring town that adopted it, became a model for youth organizations across the state. At Northwood Elementary, Ms. Albright channeled her guilt into action. She secured a small grant and launched a new program for teachers called Art as a Voice. It was a workshop designed to help educators recognize the subtle signs of trauma and distress that often manifest in children's creative expressions. It taught them to look past the surface of a drawing and see the story being told in the colors, the lines, and the composition. The program was so successful that the school district expanded it, making it a mandatory part of professional development for all elementary school staff. The folder of Lily's drawings, once a piece of evidence in a criminal trial, became a powerful teaching tool, a testament to the fact that the quietest children often have the most to say. Detective Miller, profoundly affected by the case, successfully lobbied the city council to fund a new special victims unit dedicated solely to crimes against children. He used the public outcry from the Abernathy case to secure a budget for more detectives, better forensic tools, and specialized training. He developed an unlikely but effective working relationship with the Sentinels. He never officially acknowledged it, but he would occasionally get an anonymous tip about a child living in a neglectful situation or a teen at risk, information gathered through the bikers' vast street-level network of observation. The system, once blind to Lily, was being forced to see. Lily's father underwent his own transformation. The trial had been a brutal awakening, forcing him to confront the fact that his grief had made him miss the danger his daughter was in. Racked with guilt but determined to make amends, he started therapy. He quit his second job, taking a pay cut but gaining back his evenings. He learned to cook his wife's favorite recipes, filling the house once more with the smell of home. He and Lily started a new ritual. Every night before bed, they would sit together and talk about their day, a simple act of connection that rebuilt their broken bond brick by brick. He never forgot the debt he owed the 4 men who had seen his daughter when he could not. He didn't know how to repay them, but he knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to be the father they had given him a second chance to be. 1 year later. The air on this summer evening was warm and smelled of freshly cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. The world felt soft and safe. In her backyard, at a small picnic table painted a cheerful yellow, Lily was drawing. The paper in front of her was a riot of color. A brilliant sun with a wide smile hung in a sky of the deepest blue. A unicorn with a magnificent, rainbow-striped horn soared over a field of impossibly bright flowers. The dark, jagged lines were gone, replaced by confident, joyful strokes. Her world was bright again. The low, familiar rumble of motorcycles grew steadily closer, a sound that no longer triggered a flicker of fear. It was the sound of family. The sentinels pulled up to the curb in front of her house, their engines idling in a deep, comforting rhythm. Roadblock, wrench, dock, and ghost. Their check-ins had become a quiet, regular part of her life. They never stayed long, never made a fuss. They would just appear, a silent affirmation that they were still watching, still there. Lily's father came out of the house carrying a tray with 4 tall glasses of lemonade, beads of condensation trickling down the sides. He handed them to the men, and they exchanged quiet words, the easy conversation of people who share a deep, unspoken understanding. Lily gathered her new drawings and ran across the lawn, her bare feet padding on the soft grass. She handed one to each of them. Each drawing was slightly different, but they all featured the same subjects. A big, smiling man with a kind face, sitting on a powerful motorcycle under a sky filled with rainbows. And in the bottom right corner of each picture, drawn with meticulous care, was a tiny, perfect, shining chrome wrench. Roadblock looked down at the drawing in his hand. He saw the careful detail, the vibrant colors, the sheer, unadulterated happiness radiating from the page. He looked up and met Lily's eyes. They were clear and bright, the haunted, watchful look of the girl in the alley completely gone. In its place was the simple, trusting light of a child who knows she is safe, who knows she is seen. A small, rare smile touched Roadblock's lips. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "It's a good drawing, kid," he said. The praise was simple, but it held the weight of a promise fulfilled. They finished their lemonade, handed the empty glasses back, and mounted their bikes. With a final nod to Lily and her father, they started their engines and pulled away from the curb, the 4 of them moving as one. As they rode off down the street, the setting sun glinted off the chrome of their machines, casting long shadows behind them. Their synchronized rumble faded into the warm evening air, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat moving out into the world to continue its watch. Lily stood on the lawn, holding her father's hand, the small chrome wrench she always kept in her pocket feeling cool and solid against her palm. She watched until they were out of sight, leaving behind a quiet street, a peaceful home, and a world made immeasurably safer. Because one night, in one dark alley, 4 men had chosen not to look away. They had chosen to listen, and a little girl had found the courage to speak. The promise had been kept.